Hi everyone. For my next adventure, I was kinda inspired to make a puzzle game, mainly trying to replicate Sokoban, which is an old game with different levels where you have to move crates to cover certain spaces. As mentioned in the title, I will use Godot engine. To create this game, I will also use assets from Kenny, available at the link in the description. First things first, I had to set up the project settings, then made the player scene and gave it an animated sprite. Using frames from this sprite sheet from Kenny, I created 4 different animations for walking up, left, down, and right. I created a prototype level named Proto, where you can now see the player move. The player position changes smoothly, similar to that of an animation, due to the usage of twins, which slowly adjust the position of the player to a target position over the course of 0.6 seconds, using in-out easing, which if you don't know anything about animations, basically means that it starts slow, speeds up until the middle, then slows down near the end. Another thing I experimented with was creating an input queue, so that if you press inputs while being in the moving animation, you can buffer your next moves. I opted for a queue with a max size of 1, so you can prepare one movement in advance. Since it is only one movement, even a variable would have been enough, but I kept it that way since it's the best option if you want to change the max size later. Some of the next steps will suffer a lot of changes later, but I wanted to include the whole process so you can see how things take shape while working on a game. I give the player some export variables related to the number of rows, columns, and initial grid position, because the game will be grid based. Since the camera position is fixed and the player should not go outside of the screen, I created a function that checks if the next move would take the player out of bounds. If that is the case, then the movement doesn't happen. The input queue needed some delay when adding its next action, since there was a problem where even pressing a button for a split second would measure two actions. So the following step was to fix that. The player's rows, calls, style size, and initial grid pose now get initialized directly from the script of the level instead of using export variables. I also created the level base component, which all future levels will inherit, and created a component that draws the grid of the level. It exports a variable for the level and initializes its own variables of rows and columns using said level, and it also has a function that draws lines on the screen every frame. Then I began setting up for the floors in different blocks, creating some base components, block and floor, which will also be inherited by other components. Then some child components, bricks, which are meant to be borders, wood crates, which are blocks meant to be moved by the player, stone floors, and marked stone floors, where crates should be placed over, and gave all of them sprites. Then I experimented with loading the level for the prototype level using a JSON file. This is how the JSON file is formatted, and this is the code that loads the level, and another function that initializes the data for the player. Since we can now place blocks, the next problem to figure out is how do we handle interactions with the player when the player tries to move into blocks. The player shouldn't really have knowledge about the blocks in the level since it's a separate concept. So there needs to be some involvement of the level. There are many different solutions, but I chose to go with two signals, one from the player and one from the level. The player first signals that it tries to move in a given direction, then the level checks if the movement is valid and signals that he can move in that direction. In hindsight, another great and maybe simpler solution would have been for the user input to be handled exclusively by the level. I copied the logic from the script of Proto to the script of level and created an inherited scene, the first level called level 1. I also gave it a config.json file and attributed all the necessary exported variables. Also fixed a bug related to the input queue, transfers the part that checks if the twin is playing to the try move function. The problem appeared because of previous changes to movement. Then I changed the way the grid component variables are initialized. moving it from its own script to the script of the level. For things to be even cleaner, I transfer the function that checks if the player tries to move while being on the edge of the screen, meaning the out of bounds check function, to the level. Gave the bricks a corresponding class name in their script. As I mentioned, they are meant to be unmovable, so any player attempt to walk into one should not result in movement. Thus, I created the canMove function, which does a simple check if the next movement would walk into a brick and canceled it if that was the case. Here you can see some footage of the player walking around in the level interacting with bricks. Next up, I created another inherited scene, wood crate, which is meant to be moved. The player can move one or more wood crates in the same direction as long as they don't collide into bricks. In the original game, you could only move one brick, but one wood crate. But I decided you can move as many as you want. I added the try move crates function, which checks recursively if the crates in the same direction can be moved. If the movement is possible, the crates get moved and the function returns true, allowing the player to move. Let's also give the crates a twin for their movement, a process very similar to giving the twin animation to a player. Then I did some more changes to introduce marked floors and load them from the config file. A real quick function to check if all marked pieces on the floor are covered by crates, resulting in a win, which just prints a win for now. Now let's create a second level. Because of how the base level scene was built, we need to create an inherited scene and create the config file however we want, and the level is ready to play without any other work needed. I also created a win screen, which takes you to a level select screen that is empty for now. One other fix I needed to do was to check for a win only while the player isn't moving to allow him to finish his animation. Lastly, to add more to the level select screen, it is a control node with a color rect for giving it a background, a scroll container, and a vertical box container. The levels get linked to buttons, buttons which are added dynamically in the script. It's some pretty scuffed level loading, not an ideal solution, but I'm half content with it since I built it with no help. And that's a full puzzle game in Godot. Thanks for sticking around for however long. As you've already heard everywhere, like and a subscribe would help the channel a lot, and your support would be appreciated. Next up, I was thinking of creating the same game but without a game engine, only using a library framework like SFML, Monogame, Love2D. I think it would be pretty fun to compare the workflows and amount of effort between the two methods. So let me know what you think. Well, anyway, that's everything from me today. See you next time.